All right. Peace and blessings to the family. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Brother Afro Descendant. Welcome to TransAtlantic Production live stream. We will be doing this live stream event an update of all of the ongoings out there in the world, internationally, geopolitically. Thank you to everyone in the chat for bearing with me as we are here and we are updating. Please subscribe and share this live stream. Today we are going into quite a bit of topics into what's going on, and as you can see from the post setting that was out there in the notifications through the scheduling of today's broadcast, there's a lot going on in the world today, and things just feel a little different in the world today, in the news, between what's happening geopolitically and with the election that's going on and everything that's happening out there. Uh, and what we're going to be doing over the course of the next few hours or so is we're going to go through the world of geopolitics, and at some point we're going to have a conversation with people in the chat, and anyone that wants to join in, we're going to have a panel to have this discussion. But before we start off, we do want to just lay a few ground rules where we just say be respectful. We will start to be talking about some sensitive topics today, as it relates to the election, as it relates to what's going on in the world today. So just be respectful and be mindful of brothers and sisters that's out there. So again, peace and blessings to the family. We're going to start off here in Africa, because the portion of this channel is we are the new black mind, so we want to keep with what's going on in Africa. We're going to take this article from the Black Agenda Report, the imperialist attack on the alliance of the Sahel states. And as you are aware, or may not aware, that there are a lot of things going on out there, and it seems to be part of the global agenda and what's specifically going on in the Sahel being Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Senegal, and some other countries there. That it seems to be one of the focal points of and a peripheral target in the Ukraine Russia NATO conflict. And there's just a lot going on in that area that we need to pay attention to in order to kind of keep our fingers on the pulse of what's going on out here. So, in the Black Agenda Report, we have a great article that kind of outlines what's been happening there in the Sahel. And the recent attacks on Mali has the fingerprints of Western imperialism all over it. This series of events is part of the tried and true imperialist method of creating the conditions for intervention by sowing chaos and terror. This cyclical process must be broken through revolutionary action. On July 27, 2024, armed Tuareg militants and affiliates of the Islamic State in the Sahel attacked a Malian military convoy heading to the northern part of the country, Tinzawatin, close to the border with Algeria. The ambush led to the killing of a large score of Malian military personnel and their accompanying cadres from a private military company, Wagner Group. And many of you, if you've been keeping track of the conflict that's been going on in Russia and the military presence in Africa of Russian paramilitary forces. Wagner Group is a paramilitary group that's connected with Russia that has presence in Africa, one of which their military leaders were assassinated last year. We continue. Being inflicted on one of Russia's allies in the Sahel, the Western puppet press voyeuristically rushed to glorify the violence. More importantly, Ukraine hopped on to cheer the massacre, and a Facebook post from their embassy in Dakar claimed that the country had provided information, intelligence, and military support to Tuareg militants. Such a claim was circulated to present Ukraine as a capable of striking Russia and its interests anywhere, in an attempt to globalize their reactionary fight for democracy under the auspices of NATO. So here we have Western forces interfering in the Sahel states, impacting the sovereignty of these African states to operate independently on their own, by bringing their proxy wars between Ukraine, Russia, and NATO countries, being Europe or the United States, onto the African continent. In response, Mali and Burkina Faso severed diplomatic ties with Ukraine, while Senegal, a country that recently elected a president who is reconsidering his country's position with the West, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, summoned Russia's ambassador, summoned Ukraine's ambassador for lionizing violence and sowing hatred in the brotherly country of Mali. Excuse me. Given the outcry, the Ukrainian post on Facebook has since been deleted. However, the reasons for the attack, the history of the destabilization of the region, and the root causes of the violence are completely disregarded in such disjointed and Banderite celebrations of violence. And here they're talking about the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Senegal. And this is the Facebook post that has been in question. It's been translated from French into English, and it is from the 3rd of August in Dakar, where it says the Ministry of African Intelligence and Foreign Affairs has become aware of, with surprise, the publication on the Facebook page of the Embassy of Ukraine in Dakar of a propaganda video of the Ukrainian army accompanied by a comment from the Ukrainian ambassador himself, giving unequivocal and nuanced support to the attack terrorists perpetrated between July 25th and 27th, 2024, in northern Mali by Tuareg rebels and members of the support group for Islam and Muslims against the Mali armed forces, causing significant loss of human lives within them. So here we have, within independent sovereign African nations, we have international actors from, in this case, Eastern Europe, participating on foreign soil propaganda campaigns and possibly aiding in raiding and invading those independent soils. Welcome, Crypto Almighty Magical Ma'at. MPRS, if you're still out there. So we continue on with the article from Black Agenda Report. And shout out to Glenn Ford, the great author who passed away years ago, who shed light on many of these things that are going on around the world. One of the great independent investigative journalists for African people and Black people all over the world. I am your brother, Afro Descendant, and I welcome everyone to this live. Violence, minorities, and the revolution in the Sahel. Again, the Sahel region is the region in West Africa to include Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and a few other states uh, that are independent. But for the sake of this conversation here, and we'll be going into many of the news items. We're going to be talking about Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. And these are former Francophone French colonial countries that are currently in the process of throwing off France and have thrown off France in a number of different ways administratively in their countries and essentially throwing off neo-colonialism in these countries. The Sahel region enjoyed relative stability during the years prior to 2011. If compared to what is happening today in 2024, a central element that led to the ongoing destabilization of the region must be traced back to the NATO-led destruction of the Libyan Arab Jamahiriya in 2011, which took place through the massive funding and arming of so-called rebels, including the most reactionary and obscurantist forces present in the country. Jointly arming of so-called rebels, including the most reactionary and obscurantist forces, jointly working together with the aim to topple the Libyan government. Once NATO's goals had been achieved, these Western and Gulf provided weapons and armaments quickly left the country, ending up in the neighboring countries, especially when the desert borderlands covered thousands of kilometers. So in this case, NATO providing weapons to Gaddafi's opposition almost 2 decades ago. Once Libya disintegrated, a lot of these weapons found their way to the black market and eventually into many sub-Saharan states, including Mali. As a result, in 2012, there was a drastic rise in terrorist attacks and violent raids. Islamist militant groups began wreaking destruction in the region, gaining more and more territories. The militants promised self-determination to minority groups in the region and offered that a large number of Tuareg, a group of people that has resided in Algeria, Burkina Faso, Libya, Mali, Mauritania, Morocco, and Niger for centuries, aspired to achieve given their historical grievances over their status, which had been sidelined by some of these countries' leaders. Since then, NATO countries have launched a decade-long campaign that ended with a catastrophic failure. In such a context, France occupied the most reactionary role in the history of past and present pillage of Africa and the Sahel, especially due to its long monetary dominance via the CFA, which is their currency there in many of the West African Francophone countries. After spearheading the destruction of Libya in 2011, France seized the opportunity to expand its military footprint in the region by launching a so-called counterinsurgency operation, Operation Barkhane, in 2014, seizing the entire Sahel region and allegedly fighting the Islamist threat. The imperialists were now claiming to be fighting these same groups to whom they had provided large shipments of weapons during the destruction of Libya. This renewed the imperialist crusade hardly achieved any of the expected results by the time the French were forced to withdraw in 2022. More importantly, while the French were spending €1 million per day to run this mission against terrorism, the poverty rate in these Sahel countries had reached almost 45%, even according to most reactionary estimates. So here we have a case of neo-colonialism through which most of these Western powers are inflicting a lot of damage, and in this case, destabilization in these countries through its intentions of launching wars, proxy wars. So here we have the Ukraine, Russia, NATO conflict taking its place and taking itself into the continent of Africa, where people have no connection to that war whatsoever. However, we have here now where these wars are being taken place and Africa is being destabilized and lives are being impacted on a day-to-day basis. And these countries are pushing back, that being Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. As we move on in the article, once the countries of the alliance of the Sahel formed their confederation in 2024, they incessantly highlighted the contradiction of the mode of production in the Sahel. These resource-rich countries were made hubs for mineral extraction to be exported to France. Diamonds, gold, all of these things, these inputs into your contemporary cell phones, all of these minerals are these resource-rich minerals are found within these countries. And as we recently saw, the Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso decided to take ownership of several mines in his own country of Burkina Faso, only for the latter to produce high-end consumer goods, expropriate surplus, provide energy to its people, and in return give breadcrumbs to the Sahelian countries. Following the People's Revolution that formed their confederation, they sought to break away from its subordinated relationship by dismissing military reliance on France and the West, closing foreign military bases, and developing new relationships of equals with Russia and China. So here we have, again, these countries attempting to throw off neo-colonialism because in many cases the relationship was lopsided, where these countries provided minerals for high-end consumer products in exchange for military protection. Intention of utilizing their own resources, mostly the minerals that were being extracted from the mines there, they decided to develop relationships for better deals with Russia and China. But it seems that their former colonial power that dominated that region in France and the other Western countries of NATO said that that was a bad thing, and they want to try covert war there. In other words, these governments in the Sahel have dismissed Western countries and economically replaced them with new rising pole. Unsurprisingly, France, who primarily benefited for decades from the unequal exchange between the so called Francophone Afrique, showed immediate hostility towards these Sahelian countries in the early months. It rushed to entice ECOWAS, the Economic Community of Western African States, to militarily attack Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali to, quote unquote, liberate them from these military juntas. When the African masses within ECOWAS countries expressed their disagreement on such a potential move, France and the West began cooperating with the very entities they armed a decade or so ago to legitimize their initial intervention and began supporting Islamists in northern Mali to proliferate unrest in the region again. So, again, here, France, not being able to convince ECOWAS, the economic community of the West African states, to go against the military leaders that came out as a result of the coups in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, they decided to fund Islamists in northern Mali to proliferate unrest in the region. These tactics have a twofold goal. First, they are meant to weaken the alliance and make it impossible to focus on its developmental policies, which necessitates a stable and safe economic environment. Second, they are meant to pass a message to the entire continent, showing how any country that dares to put into place a strategy of political autonomy will not be left unpunished by the imperialists. After all, as we are seeing in Palestine, the price to reclaim one's dignity for the West can also be met with genocide. In the African context, unfortunately, the West weaponizes minorities. Their demands have been hijacked in order to turn them into functionaries of imperialism. It is ironic that while the militants in northern Mali pre 2022 were considered terrorists, they are now deemed as righteous warriors of self determination against Malian oppressors. Their positioning that aims to weaken Mali is inherently in service of imperialism and its aim to keep its foothold in the Sahel, which is a key area for over 500 years. We're talking about something that's as old as colonialism itself. Please like and share this. This live stream. We will be doing this on an ongoing basis. I am Brother Afro Descendant. Just bringing you some of the latest things that are going on here in the world today, because this is something that we all need to keep our eyes and ears to the ground and continue to educate ourselves on what's been going on. We're going to go into a number of topics. We're starting on the continent here because the hashtag of this channel is the new black mind. So we want to start everywhere where there's black people and the concerns of black people all over the world. And we're starting here in the continent, and then we'll move on to other parts of the world, of the black world, where impacts to black people, because something is definitely going on. Times are changing, and we must educate ourselves as to what's going on in the world today. We're taking an article today talking about the conflicts in the Sahel region of Africa, which is West Africa, just on the Atlantic Ocean, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. These former Francophone colonial entities of France who are trying to fight off neocolonialism as best as they possibly can. And with that said, we will continue on. Drop your location in the chat, your opinions, and all. Please let me know what you think about this and if we should continue on in some of the topics that should be covered here. So here in the Sahel, the financial component, since these Sahelian countries severed their relations with the West, functionaries of imperialism were deployed in the region to cause unrest and prevent these countries, the alliance, from investing their resources in sovereign national development. Not so long ago, Niger, for example, had a military agreement with the United States that allowed the latter to house arguably one of the largest drone bases on the continent of Africa. After the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland of Niger reoriented itself politically, allied with its neighbors, and demanded the closing down of the drone base. The U.S. retaliated by employing the docile neighbors against Niger. It did so by attacking the agreement China and Niger made in 2023 to construct a pipeline that will deliver oil to Benin's ports. The agreement was put on halt because the U.S. demanded Benin block Niger's oil exports. Other sanctions have been imposed and lifted by ECOWAS on the alliance, while the U.S. still constantly puts other sanctions, puts various leaders from Mali on the sanctions list as part of the campaign to dissuade other actors from engaging with Russia. For instance, in May 2024, Mali and Russia commenced the construction of West Africa's largest solar power plant, which comes at a time when Mali struggles with providing electricity to some of half of its population. So these are some of the subsequent consequences of having these unhealthy, unbalanced relationships with former colonial powers within the country, where there are supposed to be certain protections, but the outcome of which these countries can't even provide electricity to half of its population. The financial nature of this imperialist attack should be examined beyond the confines of the state of Mali and be understood as an extension of Mali to the countries and ECOWAS in the region. Libya, following the lifting of the sanctions in 2023, was able to invest heavily in Africa. However, when NATO unleashed its war in 2011 on the people of Libya, it was coupled with sanctions that linger to this very day. One such investment entailed Malibya, an agricultural infrastructural project that paved roads and extended water access from the Niger River to the northern part of Mali. The project was sanctioned in 2011 and has been since then under mismanagement and sanctions. As a consequence, farmers have been losing their jobs and drought has soared in the region. Clearly, drought, migration, and mass infiltration of weapons from a destabilized Libya made this context a hotbed for violence. So here we have, in many cases, since the destabilization of Libya, Libya prior to 2011 had been establishing partnerships with many sub-Saharan African countries, to include Mali, one of their neighbors, at least in the agricultural investment agreement called Malibya. The destabilization had prevented the building of infrastructure, and now you see where the mismanagement and the problems of people losing their jobs and drought in the region, which the Malibia agreement attempted to rectify and reconcile, has subsequently caused destabilization there. There's also an ideological component. The self serving logic of Western imperialism is that problems created by imperialism can only be solved by imperialist intervention, and the case of Mali is no different. The recent attack on the Malian army was not only glorified by Ukraine, it was in fact lionized by so many supporters and functionaries of imperialism. In this era of mass communication, keyboard warriors such as Friazowad with identity attachment to geopolitical location are often conscripted to give detailed accounts of events, and these narratives are unquestionably accepted because of the authorities' identities. Of course, while their identity is weaponized to just certain claims, their class relation vis-a-vis imperialism is never brought up. In this manner, numerous Libyans or Syrians were used and invited to speak as long as their narratives were tallied with those of the imperialist West. I just want to check in with the chat here. How's everyone doing? Please let me know you're out there. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed. But at the very least, please like the live stream and share it with your contacts out there. And let me know, drop it in the chat, what your thoughts are about what's going on in the Sahel region. We will stay with this and move on. Um, During the recent attack, a score of France aligned English speaking accounts began writing about the attack and how there is a genocide being carried out by the Malian army against the Tuareg. This fabrication stems from the fact that Tuaregs, including Azawad, are black but with lighter skin as compared to other Malian populations. So you see divide and conquer at play 100% of the time when it comes to our people. So the ethnic cleansing claims weaponize the question of race outside of history. Let us explain this point very clearly. We are told that the Russians, alongside the Nigerians, Burkinabes, and Malians, are racist. Thus, they attacked the Tuareg. One should never forget how the race card was successfully employed in Libya, the other way around. In 2011, the blackness of Africans was a sign of evilness that Western imperialists needed to fight. In fact, the Western puppet press claimed that Libyans were fighting African mercenaries, framing the imperialist attack on the country as Libyans and NATO on one side and against savage Africans on the other side. Naturally, they conveniently forgot that Libyans are also Africans and many Libyans are black. The genocide and ethnic claims narrative served imperialism, and now it is being operationalized by the same Western puppet press to legitimize the destabilization of Mali and supporting the breaking up of the country. Hold on to your horses, family. This is what's going on all over the world. So we just want to use this as a case study to see, hey, we as Africans, as black people, no matter where we are in the world, we have to understand these things that are going on geopolitically. anything hides under the imperialist mask. This is an information war that we are embarking on right now. And we must be informed. We can no longer stick our head in the sand. We must become aware of what's going on internationally to really understand what's going on in our backyard. Let us conclude by going back to the biggest crime of the century. And a lot of this article goes on in an area that talks about what's been going on with Western imperialism and particularly West Asia. A lot of it is this engineered reverse racism. So, in this case, the revolutionary masses of the world must show their first resolve and condemn without any hesitation those who entertain the slightest idea about the progressive nature of a black female president, which we will segue into in the U.S. Imperialism is a masked up bandit, and anything can be hidden under the mask. So, with all that and all of this that is going on today, we will shift to U.S. politics. And this is a great segue because, in a lot of cases, the figureheads of these countries are just figureheads, right? We're talking about a president, um, whoever the president will be, and at least for the presidents going all the way back to World War II. We're just not sure who is actually running the country. Um, and just wanted to stop there and check in. Please check in on the chat. Let me know what you're thinking, what's going on in your world, what part of the world that you are checking into. Like and share this. Um, like and share this live stream. We will try to do this on an ongoing basis. And we will keep a close tie to what's been going on out there in the world. Please check in on the chat. Welcome to TransAtlantic Productions, and I am your host, Brother Afro Descendant Ali. Support the channel. I am of AfroDescendantNation.org. Any of you here, drop your organizations in the chat. Be active and let us know what you're thinking. So moving on to the current political climate within the world that we are in today, both internationally and domestically, at least in the United States. Uh, we have to keep tabs on all that is happening out there, and particularly in the area of the U.S. elections, where we are in the midst of today, where we see that we are pitting a black woman, allegedly in the form of Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. And today, it's kind of a 1984 type scenario where we have someone who, for the most part, were not elected by primary process, but was pretty much handpicked. Someone who had not received more than double-digit percent of primary votes in 2020, and now somehow finds themselves as the Democratic candidate. Whether you support her or not, one must definitely be attuned and aware that this person was not, for the most part, democratically elected, but was selected by their party. And once you start going down that area in terms of someone being handpicked, no matter or regardless who is on the other side, and they don't have a democratically elected person to run them against, and then at the same time not even have a platform to run on, you definitely must start scratching your head. And all of this mostly stems from the fact that we as a people are not politically educated. And in the realm and the fact that we are not politically educated, these things have real world consequences. So, in order to be able to navigate um, a world in which we live in, where politics and economics are real, we must attempt to educate ourselves because we have seen over and over our lack of having a political education has really allowed others to take advantage of us both politically and realistically. And we see the outcomes of which we constantly have to seek the help of others in order to be able just to navigate society, as we saw in Hurricane Katrina in 2006. And in this report that came out just a few days ago, report the people who were left to die, horrors suffered by Orleans Parish prisoners in the wake of Katrina, according to the ACLU 2006, remembering the plight of the incarcerated during Hurricane Katrina. On August 29th, 2005, and that's 19 years ago now. Imagine Hurricane Katrina was almost 20 years ago, folks. Hurricane Katrina ripped through New Orleans, Louisiana. In its aftermath, a storm surge breached the city's levees and drainage canals, flooding 70% of the city and exposing the abhorrent third class status of black people in the United States. Among the hardest hit were the least visible African American prisoners, especially those who were incarcerated within the Orleans Parish Prison, part of a prison system whose earliest buildings were used to imprison and torture rebellious enslaved Africans. So, can you imagine? They still have facilities at least 20 years ago in New Orleans that were used in slavery itself. Over the years, the buildings may have changed, but conditions remain the same. By the time of Katrina, the Orleans Parish Prison was known as the worst institutions in the U.S., and its social function remained one of terrorizing black folks. And that is even more than. So, again, Orleans Parish Prison is up there, if not surpasses the notorious Alcatraz, Pelican Bay, Rikers Island, all of the famous places that we've heard of before. The prison complex was the ninth largest local jail in the United States, despite New Orleans being only the 35th most populous city in the country. This statistic would only make sense because the New Orleans had the highest incarceration rate of any large city in the United States. 90% of the prison population was black in a city that was 66% black. Orleans Parish Prison also had two juvenile detention centers with children as young as 10 years old incarcerated. At the time Katrina hit, most of the 6,000 plus prisoners were pretrial detainees, not yet having been convicted of any crime. Most of those people who were there for not having paid fines. So, can you imagine being there for a traffic ticket? But the local and federal response, or delayed response, to the disaster should have been made clear, once and for all, that, to paraphrase a Kanye West of a different era, the U.S. don't care about black people. The obscene and racist treatment of New Orleans' incarcerated people reveal this in sickening fashion, or, one should state, the hard work of lawyers, journalists, local activists, and the incarcerated themselves, exposed to the world not only the brutality of the conditions in the prison, but the unbridled hatred for black people in the United States. In August 2006, the American Civil Liberties Union National Prison Project released Abandoned and Abused Orleans Parish Prisoners in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. It is a powerful, shocking document that serves as a reminder during Black August of the plight of the incarcerated. But in an age where black elite celebrity culture has happily conjoined with the fascist imperialist state, it is also a reminder that it is and will be the working classes, the poor, and the black unemployed in the U.S. and globally that will continue to bear the brunt of the United States global genocide. And the ACLU report is also linked to the article. The people who were left to die. ACLU report details horrors suffered by the Orleans Parish prisoners. Hold on, folks. Before I do that, let's check in with the chat. Anyone who wishes to come in on the live stream, let it be known in the chat, and we will get you in here. I am your host. I am Brother Afro Descendant, and I am here with you for the next few hours. We're going over the latest information that is happening around the world and nationally. New Orleans, as the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina approaches, the American Civil Liberties Union's National Prison Project released on Thursday Abandoned and Abused Orleans Parish Prisoners in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. The report documents the experiences of thousands of men and women and children who were abandoned at the Orleans Parish Prison. The prisoners inside the Orleans Parish Prison suffered some of the worst horrors of Hurricane Katrina, said Eric Balaban, a staff attorney for the National Prison Project. Because society views prisoners as second-class citizens, their stories have largely gone unnoticed and therefore untold. In conjunction with the report's release, the National Prison Project urged the President to direct the Department of Justice to evaluate current evaluation plans for Orleans Parish Prison in an effort to determine whether any meaningful improvements have been made over the past year. The ACLU also asked Congress to audit the jail's emergency preparedness plans. The ACLU is calling for a full and immediate investigation into abuses at Louisiana correctional facilities during and after the storm, and is also urging the DOJ to make the findings from such an investigation public and accessible to state and federal prosecutors. The ACLU report ascribes a history of neglect at Orleans Parish Prison, one of the most dangerous and mismanaged jails in the country. This culture of neglect was evident in the days before Katrina, when the sheriff declared that the prisoners would remain where they belong, quote unquote, despite the prisoners' decision to declare the city's first ever mandatory evacuation. OPP, Orleans Parish Prison, even accepted prisoners, including juveniles as young as 10, from other facilities to ride out the storm. As flood waters rose in the Orleans Parish Prison buildings, or henceforth we'll just say OPP, power was lost. Entire buildings were plunged into darkness. Deputies left their posts wholesale, leaving behind prisoners in lock cells, some standing in sewage tainted water up to their necks. The sheriff's office was completely unprepared for the storm, said Tom Jowett, litigation fellow for the National Prison Project. The Louisiana Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals did more than 263 stray pets than the sheriff did with more than 6,500 men, women, and children left in its care. Among the testimonies of the people profiled in the ACLU report are these: Ashley George, one of 300 children transferred to the OPP shortly before the storm from the city's Youth Studies Center. When they said the storm started, water broke through the gate and started rising. The day after the storm, water came into the place, and I was in water up to my neck for a couple of days. We got no food, no water. I felt like I was going to die. The guards didn't do anything to help us. We weren't going to get out, but the adult prisoners escaped and got help for us. Military people told us that if we had stayed in there another day, we would have drowned. Adults took a mattress and floated some girls out to the boat. I took another boat and went to the bridge where I got chips and water. There were pregnant girls with us also, but they did not get any special attention. Ashley's grandmother, Ruby Ann George, said, after the storm, I was going crazy. I kept calling and calling and calling. They ain't nothing but children. I kept calling all over, but I didn't find out where she was for a month. It's horrible. Nobody should have gone through that, adults or children. They should have gotten them out there. I was mad. If it wasn't for the prisoners, they would have drowned. This is the United States of America we're talking about, family. Joyce Gilson also told of prisoners helping each other. The women in our unit stayed in open dorms with triple stacked bunk beds. At the time of the storm, some women were even sleeping on the floor because there wasn't enough bed space. Water backed up from the commodes, and sewer water from the flood came under the doors and filled up the unit to the second bunk. We didn't know what was going on, and it was hard to even know what day it was. In our unit, there were elderly women who had trouble getting into the top of the third bunk to avoid water. There was at least one pregnant lady who also had trouble. We tried to help these women as best we could. My friend, Iris Hardiman, was really sick, and we were worried about her. We were all trying to stick together, singing, praying, trying to be strong through it all, because we didn't know what was going to happen. We had no food to eat except the little bit that people had brought from commissary. But we'd eaten all of that long before they finally moved us. When it was time to move us, deputies told us to get all our stuff and we could bring with us. With no light, we couldn't find anything. So we just carried our own bodies, and we held people who couldn't hold themselves up. The water was up to my chest. They came to take us out of the building and took us out of central lockup, which was filled with water. In the central lockup, there were men as well as women. The women were still being pretty supportive of each other, but some men were trying to escape any way they could, and there was shooting around us. There were big double doors where the boats were picking people up, and we could see outside. We stood up on the truck to get into the boat. They took us to the overpass and told us to sit down. We were on one side of the bridge and the men were on the other side. There were dogs and officers there. The officers used plastic cuffs to cuff each woman to the next to her. Then they told us to sit back down with other women. There were ice chests full of bottled water on the bridge, and we were asking for water. We were so thirsty, it was really once, only then, that we started to get wild and really trying to get to the ice chests. They could only have given us a piece of ice or something. Some women reached in, and that was when they maced us and put dogs on us and didn't get to touch any of the ice. Some civilians on the bridge were trying to give us water too, but the officers wouldn't allow them to get close. Can you imagine all this stuff was going on in Hurricane Katrina with all this state of emergency going on around us, but somehow, some way, these prison officials, these jail officials, still had the wherewithal to oppress black people with dozens of feet high of water and madness going on around them. They still are not going to cut any slack to these black people. Amazing. Let me check in with the chat here. All right. Peace and blessings to the family. Hang in there. We're just going to complete this article and move on to the next item. And the inmate continues, I was tired and very weak. They had people passing out at that point. I lost sight of my friend Iris at that point. Didn't see her again until we got to Angola, and they were deciding where to put us. She died a little while after we got to Angola, but I didn't see her die because they placed me in a different part of the building. I can't remember how long it was before I found out where my family was. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks. I thank God today that I'm alive. With all that we went through, I thought they would really leave us for dead. I don't conversate about it because I'm trying to forget it. If I could talk to Sheriff, it wouldn't be nothing nice. Antonio Williams on August 27th, 2005. And this is another one of the new, and this is a report from the Orleans Parish Prison in the wake of Hurricane Katrina more than 20 years later. It's funny how all of this information comes out 20 years later. As time, life has moved on, people have died, children have become adults within that time span, how the truth finally comes out and people have lived the inconveniences of life. Quantonio Williams on August 27, 2005 states, I was arrested and charged with possession of marijuana, and I was taken to Orleans Parish Prison. Again, this is someone taken in for possession of marijuana back in 2005. All over America, it was a punishable crime, and in most cases, in most major cities throughout the United States, people can smoke marijuana even in the presence of law enforcement. How times have changed. After I had been there a couple of days, the water started rising in the building. When it reached approximately 2.5 feet, the detainees were locked down and the corrections officers left. So these people just locked the prison and left. After the staff left, one detainee was able to open his cell door because he had fixed his door so it would not lock. He had gotten through a broken window to a control area and used the controls to open all the cells in a unit. Because the cell doors were now locked, everyone was unlocked. Everyone was able to go to the second level of the tier out of the water. The detainees went to a second area in OPP and tried to help get other detainees out of their cells. They were able to get some of the cell doors open so that these detainees could move to the second tier in that area. But they were not able to open the doors for all other detainees. The correctional officers came back and moved us to Templeman 3. We were put into a basketball court. There was no plumbing, electricity, or air circulation available at this location. We were first in a basketball court, and on the second floor, we had no access to water. The staff all left again. After about a day and a half, someone broke glass to get access to a water fountain. We had no food during this entire period, and everyone was hungry. People wrote signs and put them on the windows asking for help. Eventually, someone suggested using the rim of the basketball hoop as a tool to get out of the building to try to be able to breathe and get food and water. It took about 12 hours of various detainees working to try to make a hole out of the building. Eventually, the detainees managed to create a hole that was barely large enough for some of the smaller prisoners to wiggle through. Some of the detainees started to escape. About 30 minutes after people started to escape, I heard a shot. Other detainees told me that a detainee had been shot, but I did not see it. Detainees told the staff that we couldn't breathe and we needed food and water. The staff went away. Some people tried to escape again. After people would start to escape again, the staff would come back outside. At first, the staff tried to keep people from using the hole, but eventually told us that if we could get out the hole, we could do so. Then they would take custody of us. People tied sheets together to go down the wall. Eventually, the sheets broke, and I believe that some people who got out this way and some were arrested. All told, I was on the basketball court for 2 days without food and most of the time without water. Eventually, the corrections officer said that they were coming in to get us. When we were told that the correction officers were coming in to take custody of us, we were afraid because we expected them to beat us. Based on the reputation of OPP corrections officers, we lay down on the floor on our stomachs to try to give them no excuse to beat us. There was a lot of staff from other jails, and as it turned out, we did not get beaten. We were then escorted to the first floor, where we spent an hour. The floodwater on the first floor was almost up to my neck. Around 7 a.m., I was taken out of Templeman 3 to an overpass. On the overpass, we were put in rows. The rows in front had floodwater coming up to them. The staff who took us told us that we would be given food and water. Although we saw lots of food and bottled water around, we were not given any. We saw the correction officers drinking the water. The sun was bearing down on us, and it was extremely hot. 3 boats were taking 10 men at a time from the overpass. They took people from the front row. It took a long time to get to the front row, and lots of people were passing out in the sun. All the people who passed out were just left out in the sun to the side and not transported. One man in this section started acting out, and the correction officer just sprayed all the people in the area with mace, including me. At 5 p.m., the boat stopped coming. We were told that we would have to go down from the overpass and climbed down scaffolding to the interstate. We were told that once we got to the interstate, we would get some food and water. We climbed down the scaffolding around 3 a.m. When we got down to Interstate 10, we were handcuffed in pairs and we were each given one small paper cup of water with no food. I saw cases and cases of water and boxes of food there. The guy I was cuffed to, and I asked the corrections officer if we could eat an apple we found on the ground. He gave us permission. We each ate half. We asked for more water. The officer said that he would check. He later told us he was not allowed to give us water. We were eventually put on buses and I fell asleep. We were taken to Hunt Correctional Center. When we get there, the warden greeted us by saying, "So you are the people who were..." Oh, wow. "So you are the people who were left to die." Eventually, we were allowed to stand in line for a 2-minute call after 10 p.m. I was very fortunate because I was able to reach my wife. After a couple of days, she was able to get through the procedure to get me released on a $500 bond. I was released on September 22nd, 2005. These are the untold stories of Hurricane Katrina. And this is from the ACLU attorney Eric Balaban, who states, "We must preserve these stories to create a record of tragedy and to ensure that the mistakes detailed in this report are never repeated." And this report can be found online through the ACLU website. And family, these are just some of the things that people have experienced in this country, because for the most part we are powerless people in this country, and we must be able to attain the necessary political education in order to be able to navigate a society that is almost 100% against us. So we also want to move on to another article as it relates to our lack in America, specifically our lack of political power and the consequences when we choose, and it's specifically a choice, when we choose not to engage politically, and the lack of power and the consequences that comes as a result of this. After Michael Brown's killing, Wesley called for accountability on both sides in Ferguson racism. And this was originally printed in The Intercept. 3 months after police officer Darren Wilson killed 18-year-old Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, setting off what became the Black Lives Matter movement, Wesley Bell, the current St. Louis prosecutor running to unseat Representative Cori Bush, told a local news radio show that there wasn't a strong racial divide in Ferguson. Bell, who was serving as a municipal court judge and county college professor at the time, said he hoped Brown's killing would wake some people up to get black residents more engaged in their community, and that real tragedy of the situation was that the prosecutors hadn't shared Wilson's side of the story with the public, which was fomenting distrust in the process. In Bell's opinion, not releasing evidence that spoke to the officer's side of the story was a mistake on the part of the prosecution. To me, that's the tragedy of it, is that moments later, I can't even tell you whether I believe the officer should be indicted or not, because I don't have the evidence, Bell said. Bell is now running with more than 8 million in backing from the American Israel Public Affairs Committee against Bush in the Democratic primary next week in Missouri's first congressional district. Bush rose to national prominence as a Black Lives Matter organizer. In Ferguson, Bell was elected to Ferguson City Council in the first election following the surge of local protests, beating out a candidate supported by protester groups, and went on to unseat the St. Louis prosecutor Bob McCulloch, whom he criticized in this interview for his handling of the case. Bell made the comments about Ferguson in November 2014 on the Nick Taliaferro show, which went off the air in 2017. At the time, Bell was a municipal court judge in the small St. Louis suburb of Velda City, which was sued in 2015 in a federal civil rights case overrunning an unlawful bail system. Brown's killing wasn't unique to Ferguson. Bell said during the radio segment, "These are issues that have been plaguing our city since the beginning of our country. Since when I hear, well, it's just Ferguson, even in this area, it's not just Ferguson. These issues have been happening all over the region. It's just this particular one happened in Ferguson, and that's been playing in the media." In the wake of Brown's killing, there was a sense that the racial divide in Ferguson was comparable to that of Selma, Alabama in the 1960s. Taliaferro said, "That's just not the case," Bell said. "In the United States, there is a racial divide. I think we agree with that. I'm saying, relatively speaking, Ferguson is not that bad. Ferguson's racial divide was less than normal," Bell said, notwithstanding issues that needed work, including diversity in the police force and the government, but need for accountability was on both sides. Bell said African Americans need to get more involved. When he ran for a council seat, black people weren't involved in the political process. He said, "I'm hoping this wakes some people up." The quote is pretty astonishing, coming from not only a black man in St. Louis, but a black man who lived in Ferguson and was a municipal court judge, said Thomas Harvey, a civil rights lawyer who ran the nonprofit law firm in St. Louis that sued Velda City under Bell's judgeship. Harvey is currently based in Los Angeles, and it is also an indication of the deep racism in St. Louis that you could look at Ferguson and say, "It's not that bad," Harvey said. The Bell campaign commented on the 2014 interview in a statement. Cori Bush and her allies are intentionally mischaracterizing Wesley's comments, wrote Anjan Mukherjee, a spokesman for the Bell campaign, in the interview. He was criticizing then prosecuting Anthony Moloch for being secretive and not releasing the evidence on Wilson, a criticism he felt so strongly about that he ultimately ran against McCulloch and beat him. Compared to other cities in Missouri at the time, it's accurate to say that Ferguson was in the middle of the spectrum of unconstitutional practices and racist policing. According to Harvey, it's just that they were all racist. It's weird to say weird to hear someone say that Ferguson's wasn't that bad. I think it's actually indicative of how bad racism is in St. Louis overall and the whole region. What you're doing is comparing it to the worst, most explicit forms of racism and saying that it isn't exactly happening in Ferguson. Arrest rates, police violence stops, tickets, fines, jailing were overwhelmingly disproportionately targeted against black people living in Ferguson or passing through, Harvey said. That is well known, he added, and at the time it was common knowledge. Clients who lived in and near Ferguson would tell him that they wouldn't travel to see friends and family around holidays because they didn't want to get arrested and spend Thanksgiving or Christmas in jail, he said. Harvey said he used to work with pregnant women in St. Louis, many of whom didn't want to drive to get prenatal care for the same reason. They arranged taxis instead. Wesley was a judge in a town where the exact same thing was happening, Harvey said. The prevailing logic at the time was that it was better to have a black judge who could empathize with the population even if the system was still operating in a racist way, Harvey said. I think that just kind of reflects Wesley's overall politics, which is the system still can be racist. We can still be jailing people illegally, holding them for $50, exploiting them, destroying their lives, so long as there's a sort of kinder, gentler person who is able to empathize with them when they came before the court. That was really surprising to hear, especially that when it was 2014 after Michael Brown was murdered, Harvey said. This was common knowledge well before Michael Brown was murdered, and it was especially common knowledge among any black person I met who lived in or around North County. He said, "It's just shocking to hear him say that. He must mean Ferguson isn't the worst city in that region, and I agree there are worse." And he said, "It's hard to understand." Bell was elected St. Louis County prosecuting attorney against the 3-decade incumbent with close ties to local police. Bell was lauded as the first head black prosecutor in the jurisdiction, someone who could champion the progressive reforms St. Louis had been pushing for since before Brown's killing. Staff attorneys in the St. Louis prosecutor's office were so angered by his win that they left the prosecutors' union to join the local police union. But Bell later disappointed supporters when he declined to charge Wilson in Brown's killing after reviewing the case. On the radio in 2014, Taliaferro asked Bell when he thought what he thought would happen if the grand jury decided not to indict Wilson. Bell said he didn't think there was any chance Wilson would remain an officer in Ferguson, but that the worst case scenario, from a perspective of safety and unrest, was if the grand jury decided not to indict. There's going to be some kind of violent response. It's just a matter of how much. And obviously, we're all praying that it's not a lot, Bell said. He believed a nonviolent protest as opposed to violence. Last month, as the race against Cori Bush heated up, civil rights groups issued a report claiming that his office had not delivered on the reforms he promised on the campaign trail, and that the jail population had steadily climbed under his leadership. Wesley Bell has exposed himself as a fraud, said Working Families Party spokesman Ravi Mangla. He's running on being a Ferguson reformer when it's clear he couldn't see the deep lying issues in his own community. Harvey, who was co-counsel on the suit over the bail system while Bell was judge in Velda City, said they would have sued Bell personally if they could have. If judges didn't have judicial immunity, we would have sued the judges in those cities, he said. They're very clearly participants in the system and know what's happening and are frequently the reason people are incarcerated, Harvey said. And it's ridiculous to think they don't know. It's impossible for Wesley Bell and any municipal court judge to say they don't know what's happening. And that's it. That's the report there. And as we can see, we get these politicians who look like us. Black faces in high places are not a thing that serve our in best interests. However, um, that is incumbent on an empowered pleb, an empowered population, um, to be able to politicize themselves. And you can get a lot of that political information here on TransAtlantic Production. So we are going to end this brief broadcast, but we will continue this tomorrow, where we will continue to bring a lot of the news here and do our analysis, political analysis, and updates of what's going on out there in the world. And so stay tuned. A lot of hot things. I am Brother Afro Descendant Ali. Support the channel, support this link, keep it moving, and drop your comments once the video is posted.